The glass elevator rose through 42 floors of Tanner Holdings like a slow exhale, and Alan Tanner stood inside it the way he stood inside everything. Perfectly still, perfectly composed, a man carved from patience and expectation. His reflection looked back at him from the polished steel doors, charcoal suit, silver cufflinks, dark hair swept back with the kind of effortless precision that other men paid their stylists dearly to replicate. He paid no one. He simply woke up looking like that. His executive assistant, Priya, had once whispered to a colleague that watching Alan walk into a boardroom was like watching a storm decide not to happen. The air always changed around him. Not with aggression, but with a kind of absolute certainty. The kind that made grown men straighten their ties and reconsider every sentence they had planned to say. He was 34 years old. He had taken Tanner Holdings from a mid-sized architecture and development firm into one of the most respected infrastructure corporations in the country. He had done it by working 16-hour days for 6 consecutive years, by sleeping 4 hours a night when necessary, by eating lunches over spreadsheets and dinners on conference calls. He had done it with ice in his veins and fire in his chest and a stubborn refusal to accept any outcome he hadn't personally chosen. His employees did not fear him, exactly. Fear implied something irrational. What they felt was closer to awe, and a very healthy awareness that Alan Tanner noticed everything. He noticed when reports were padded. He noticed when confidence was performed rather than earned. He noticed, somehow, when someone had been crying in the bathroom before a meeting, and he would quietly reroute the conversation away from whatever had put them there without ever making them feel seen in a way that embarrassed them. That last part was the piece that undid people the most. Because a man that precise, that controlled, you expected coldness. You expected the architecture of power without the warmth of humanity. But Alan moved through both registers at once, and the combination was, as one of his directors had said after 3 glasses of wine at a company dinner, frankly unfair. The elevator doors opened on the 42nd floor, and Alan stepped into the executive suite. Floor-to-ceiling windows swallowed 3 walls of the space. The city spread below like a circuit board, lines and lights and the organized chaos of a million lives moving at once. He walked to his desk without looking at the view. He had memorized the view. What he cared about now was the stack of contract revisions that Priya had marked urgent in the red folder on the left side of his desk. Good morning. Priya appeared at his doorway, tablet in hand, reading glasses pushed up on her head. She was 51, brisk, entirely without reverence for his reputation, and the only member of his staff he considered genuinely indispensable. The Mercer Group pushed the 10 o'clock to 11. Legal wants 30 minutes before that, and your lunch is? Cancel the lunch. She paused. It's with Chen. He flew in from... Reschedule it to dinner. Same restaurant. Tell him I apologize and mean it. He was already reading the first document in the folder. What else? Nothing that can't wait until after legal. She turned to leave, then stopped. Also, just professionally observing, you have that look. He didn't glance up. What look? The one you get when you haven't slept. She said it the way a woman states a weather forecast. Not with concern exactly. With information. I slept. For how long? A very brief pause. Sufficiently. Priya made a sound that was not quite a sigh, and not quite a hum, and contained within it the complete and total skepticism of a person who had worked for him for 7 years. She left without another word. Alan set down the document, stared at the window for exactly 3 seconds, the city, the light, the indifferent sky, and then pulled out his phone. No new messages. He set the phone face down on his desk and returned to the contracts. The thing about Alan Tanner was this. He had not always been so still. There had been a version of him, 10 years ago, who laughed too loud at parties and stayed out past 2 in the morning and made spectacularly bad decisions with the kind of joyful recklessness that youth allows. A version who once drove 4 hours to the coast on a whim because a friend had said the sunsets there were worth seeing. A version who wrote long letters he never sent, full of emotions he didn't have words for yet. That version had not disappeared. It had simply been filed, organized, given a very specific address inside him where it lived quietly, like a room he kept locked, not because the contents were dangerous, but because he no longer had time to sit in it. The room, lately, smelled like Noel. Noel Harris had entered his life not with drama, but with an argument. It had been 18 months ago. A project review meeting. A new residential development on the east side of the city, affordable housing component required by the zoning board, which Alan had insisted on expanding beyond the minimum because the math on long-term community stability supported it, and also, quietly, because he believed in it. His architects had presented the plans. His finance team had presented the numbers. And then a consultant from the urban planning firm they'd contracted, young, unassuming, holding a binder that looked like it had been reorganized 4 times, had raised his hand. I have some concerns about the community access points. Alan had looked at him for the first time, mid-20s. Brown hair that fell across his forehead in a way that suggested he'd pushed it out of his eyes approximately 40 seconds ago. Glasses that were very slightly crooked. The kind of face that looked like it had been built for expressing things. Every thought moving through it like weather. What kind of concerns, Alan had said. And Noel Harris had proceeded to spend 12 minutes respectfully, carefully, and with complete precision explaining why the proposed pedestrian access design would functionally isolate the affordable housing units from the commercial amenities on the eastern side of the development, creating, in effect, a beautiful development with an invisible wall built into it. He used actual data. He referenced 3 comparable projects. He did not apologize for having the concerns or for taking the time, and he maintained eye contact with Alan throughout in a way that was entirely professional and also, somehow, entirely unintimidated. When he finished, the room was quiet. Alan studied him for a moment. Then he turned to his lead architect. He's right. Revise the access plan. Add 2 additional pedestrian corridors. Cross-reference his comparative data. I want revised drawings by the end of the week. The meeting moved on. But something in Alan's chest had not. He'd had his assistant find the consulting firm's contact sheet before the elevator reached the lobby. What followed was not, by most romantic measures, a sweeping courtship. Alan was not built for sweeping. What he was built for was precision, and he applied it with characteristic thoroughness to the project of getting to know Noel Harris. He found reasons to include the consulting firm in subsequent review meetings. He read the reports Noel submitted with a level of attention that went somewhat beyond what the professional relationship required. He noticed that Noel took his coffee black with 1 sugar, that he always had a pen behind his ear even when a tablet was available, that he made small, careful drawings in the margins of his notes when he was thinking, and that he had a laugh that arrived without announcement, sudden and warm and slightly surprised at itself. Like he hadn't expected whatever just happened to be that funny. He noticed that Noel was an omega. He noticed this the way he noticed everything, quietly, and with appropriate understanding of what it meant and what it didn't mean, which was that it told him nothing essential about who Noel was. What Noel was, in every way that mattered, was sharp and principled and unexpectedly funny, and the kind of person who remembered small things people said and brought them back months later with the casual ease of someone who had simply been paying attention all along. He noticed, too, the way Noel looked at him sometimes, quick glances that weren't entirely professional, followed by the immediate disciplined neutrality of someone reminding themselves where they were. Alan had taken 6 months to say anything about any of this. Not from uncertainty, but because he wanted to be sure. He did not do things partially. He would not pursue this halfway. He'd asked Noel to dinner on a Thursday evening after a project wrap-up meeting in the most straightforward sentence he could construct. I'd like to take you to dinner. Not as a professional courtesy. I want to be clear about that distinction. Noel had gone very still in a way that was completely unlike his usual animation. Then, quietly, how long have you been thinking about that sentence? Approximately 4 months. Another brief silence. And then Noel had smiled. Not the professional smile, not the polite smile, but the real one. The one that did something complicated to the light in his eyes. Okay, he said. Yes. 18 months later. The dinner had become weekend mornings in Alan's apartment. Coffee made the way Noel liked it. Architectural drawings spread across the dining table alongside Noel's planning reports. Two different kinds of work existing in comfortable parallel. It had become Noel's toothbrush in the bathroom, and Noel's books on the nightstand, and Noel's voice on the phone at 11 at night when Alan was still at the office asking, not demanding, never demanding, but somehow making the asking feel like something worth orienting toward. Whether Alan had eaten, it had become the most quietly extraordinary thing in Alan's life, which was saying something, given what his life contained. And it had become, over time, a conversation neither of them had fully finished yet. About what they were, about what came next. About the bond that hung between them like a question they both knew the answer to, and were both, for different reasons, moving towards slowly. Noel's reasons were straightforward and honest, because Noel was both those things. He had been in a previous relationship with an alpha who had used the bonding dynamic as a mechanism of control, and the memory of it made him careful, not afraid. Noel was not afraid of Alan, had never been, which was one of the things Alan loved most fiercely about him, but careful, thoughtful, moving toward trust at a pace his own heart could ratify. Alan's reasons were also straightforward. Though he had needed Noel to help him articulate them, he was afraid of needing something this much. The stillness he had built, the control, the glass and steel composure, it had kept him functional through years of difficulty. Letting it become irrelevant, even to something he wanted, that was the hardest thing he had ever been asked to do. They were working on it, together, which was the important part. On the morning that everything changed, Alan had kissed Noel goodbye at the door of his own apartment. Noel had stayed 3 nights, which had become increasingly the norm, and watched him go with the specific, quiet ache of a man who was deeply aware of what he was watching walk away from him. Noel had looked back from the hallway, the way he sometimes did, and smiled. Don't forget to eat lunch this time. I always eat lunch. Alan, I have photographic evidence. Those photos are taken out of context. Noel had laughed, that sudden, warm, slightly surprised laugh, and disappeared into the elevator. Alan had stood in the doorway for 3 seconds after the doors closed. Then he'd gone inside, made himself breakfast for the first time in recent memory, and arrived at the office at 7:45, feeling something he could only describe, privately, as happy. The Mercer meeting went well. Legal's 30 minutes ran to 45, and resolved 6 of 7 outstanding issues, with the 7th requiring a consultant opinion they'd have by end of week. The afternoon moved with the particular productive momentum that good mornings tend to generate. Alan was reviewing projected costs on the Millbrook residential Phase 2 when his personal phone rang. Not his work phone, his personal phone, which had a separate ring, lower, quieter, a sound designed not to disrupt meetings, and which very few people had the number for. His mother, his brother, 3 people from his university years whom he still saw occasionally, and Noel. He picked it up without looking at the screen, because the only person who called that number during working hours was Noel, and Noel knew his schedule and only called during working hours when something was, actually, Alan. The voice hit him before the words made any sense. Because the voice wasn't Noel's voice, not entirely. It was Noel's voice, yes, he would know it in any register, in any state. But it was Noel's voice stripped of the quality that always lived in it, that particular warmth and animation. This was Noel's voice, the way a room looks when the furniture has been moved. Recognizable shape, wrong atmosphere. Noel. He was already standing. He didn't remember deciding to stand. What's wrong? A small, careful breath. I don't want you to panic. Tell me where you are. Another breath. I'm at St. Carver's. The hospital. It's not, I don't think it's serious. I fell at the site visit. The Marchetti project. I was doing the walkthrough, and there was a section of scaffolding that wasn't secured properly, and I landed wrong. They think it might be my wrist and possibly a rib. They're doing imaging now." He paused. "I'm okay. I really think I'm okay. I just wanted to. I'm coming. Alan, you don't have to. I'm coming." He was already moving. "Which ward?" "Emergency, but I'm being moved to radiology," they said after that. "I'll be in Bay." "Alan, please don't." "Noel." He stopped at his office door, hand on the frame, made himself stop, made himself breathe. "Are you in pain right now?" A pause that lasted exactly long enough to tell him the truth. "A little." "The wrist is?" "Yeah. They gave me something, but it hasn't quite. I'm leaving now. I'll be there in 20 minutes. He paused. "Are you scared?" The question surprised Noel into a moment of silence. "A little," he said again, smaller this time. "Mostly I wanted to hear your voice." Something enormous moved through Alan's chest. Not the controlled variety, not the filed-away, managed kind. Raw and immediate and without the slightest interest in being organized. "You have it," he said. "I'm here, I'm coming, keep your phone on." He was already moving when he ended the call. What happened next became, in the weeks and months that followed, a story that circulated through Tanner Holdings with the particular energy of a myth. Priya saw it first. She had been at her desk running through the afternoon agenda when Alan came through his office door, moving at a pace she had never seen him move at. Not running. Alan Tanner did not run through offices. But something very close to it, something that had all the controlled velocity of running packed into the shell of walking very fast. His jacket was already in his hand. His phone was at his ear. He was pale. Not the pale of illness. The pale of adrenaline. The color that appears when every non-essential process redirects itself toward a single urgent purpose. "Clear my afternoon," he said, passing her desk without stopping. "Everything. Move whatever can be moved, cancel whatever can't. Tell Chen I'll explain personally." He was already at the elevator. "Call Marcus and have him meet me in the garage." Priya stood up. This had never happened. In 7 years, this had never happened. "Alan, what? Noel's in the hospital." The elevator doors opened. He stepped in, looked back at her, and for a fraction of a second she saw something in his face that she had never seen there before. Not once in 7 years. Unguarded terror. "I'll check in when I know more." The doors closed. Priya stood in the empty corridor for a moment. Then she sat down slowly and said, to no one in particular, "Oh." Down the hall, in the open plan area, 2 junior analysts who had witnessed the whole thing were staring at each other. Was that? Yes. Did he just? Yes. A silence. "I didn't know he could look like that." None of us did. Marcus, his driver, had the car at the garage exit in 4 minutes. Alan was in the back seat before the door was fully open and the car was moving before he had his seatbelt on, which was the second unprecedented thing to happen in his life in the past 5 minutes. Because Alan always had his seatbelt on before the car moved. He called Noel's phone. No answer. Radiology, probably. In the machine. He pressed his thumb against the corner of his phone and looked out the window at the city moving past and did something he had not consciously done in years. He let himself feel it without trying to manage it. The fear was clean, at least. No ambiguity. No complexity. Just the need to get to Noel, stripped of everything else. He thought about the scaffolding. About what scaffolding that wasn't secured meant in terms of what could have happened, what the variables were, how far. He stopped thinking about that. He stopped thinking about it by a conscious and significant act of will, because that direction led nowhere useful, and everything useful pointed forward, toward the hospital, toward the moment he was in the same room as Noel. His phone buzzed. A text. "Noel, imaging done. They're moving me to Bay 7. Don't stress. I'm actually okay. I mean, my wrist hurts a lot, but I'm okay. Noel, also, I'm sorry for worrying you." Alan stared at the last message for a long moment, typed back, "Don't apologize for calling me. Ever." A pause. Then, "Okay." Then, after another beat, "Are you actually on your way?" Alan, "Yes." Noel, Alan, you had the Mercer Review and the Chen dinner and 3 other things. Alan, Noel, Noel, yes, Alan. Nothing else exists right now. The message delivered. The typing indicator appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. Then, okay, I'll be in Bay 7. Alan put his phone in his pocket, looked out the window, breathed. 20 years from now, he thought, with the peculiar clarity that crises sometimes allow. 20 years from now, I will still remember what this felt like, the specific texture of this fear, and what it means about what he is to me. Saint. Carver's emergency wing smelled like antiseptic and recycled air, and Alan moved through it with the focused energy of a man who had decided that bureaucracy was an obstacle he would circumvent by the simple force of moving faster than it could organize itself. The triage desk nurse looked up with the practiced authority of someone accustomed to managing people who thought their urgency was unique. She opened her mouth. Noel Harris, Alan said, Bay 7. I'm his. He paused for just a beat, the half-second during which he recognized that there was no formal word yet for what he was, and that he refused to let that absence diminish the reality. I'm the person who belongs with him. Where is Bay 7? The nurse, to her credit, looked at his face and then simply pointed. He found Noel behind the 3rd curtain. Quick pause here. If you want to watch our videos early with 0 ads or get access to exclusive videos, our Patreon has you covered. Link in the description. Alright, back to where things get interesting. The bay was exactly what emergency bays were. Small, practical, the particular kind of stripped-down honesty that hospitals deal in. Noel was sitting up on the narrow bed in a hospital gown, his left wrist wrapped in a temporary splint. His hair disheveled and his glasses. One of the lenses had a small crack in the corner that hadn't been there this morning, which Alan noticed and felt in his sternum, slightly bent. There was a faint bruising beginning at his jaw, and what looked like it would become a significant bruise along his left side, visible where the gown gaped slightly at the collar. He looked small. In the impersonal light of the bay, he looked like Noel, which was to say entirely himself, all that animation and intelligence living in his face even now. Even when he was clearly in pain and clearly trying not to show it, and he looked small. When he saw Alan, something released in him. Alan could see it, could see the precise moment the held tension gave way, like a lock opening. Noel's shoulders dropped half an inch. His breath changed. You actually came, Noel said, and his voice had the particular fragility of someone who had been holding themselves together for the past hour and was now in the presence of someone with whom they didn't have to. Alan crossed the bay in 4 steps and sat on the edge of the bed beside him and put his hand very carefully, aware of the wrist, aware of the rib, against Noel's face. Just his hand, his palm against Noel's cheek. And Noel closed his eyes and leaned into it, and Alan exhaled for what felt like the first time in 40 minutes. Of course I came, Alan said, very quietly. You called me. I didn't want to pull you out of, Noel. He waited until Noel opened his eyes. You are never, in any circumstance, an interruption. Do you understand that? Noel looked at him for a long moment. The cracked glasses, the bruised jaw, those eyes, which were, even now, even here, the most alive eyes Alan had ever looked into. I'm starting to, Noel said. Alan moved his thumb, very gently, across Noel's cheekbone. Tell me what happened, from the beginning. It's embarrassing. Tell me anyway. A small exhale that was almost a laugh. The site manager was showing me the upper-level access on the eastern side. You know, the ones from the revised plan, your architect's plan, the corridors we added. He paused. Which are good, by the way. They're going to work exactly right. Noel. Right, sorry. So I was up there and I stepped onto this temporary scaffolding platform to get a better angle on the spatial relationship between the... It doesn't matter. The platform wasn't properly secured. It shifted. I grabbed for the railing and missed, and I went down about 6 feet onto the secondary platform below. He said it matter-of-factly, with the narrative clarity of someone who processes difficulty by describing it precisely. The wrist took the impact. I think I caught the railing with my side on the way down, which explains the rib. Alan had gone very still. Not the professional stillness, the other kind, the kind that lives underneath composure. 6 feet, he said, approximately. Onto scaffolding. It was the platform, so it had some give. Noel? He stopped, breathed, made a decision. I'm going to say something and I need you to just let me say it. Noel became very quiet, watching him. I drove here for 20 minutes, thinking about what 6 feet onto scaffolding could have meant if any variable had been different. I am not. He paused. I am not someone who catastrophizes. But sitting in that car, thinking about what could have. He stopped again. Found the sentence. You are the most important thing in my life. Not the most important person, the most important thing. And when I think about any version of today that goes differently than this, that ends somewhere I can't. He pressed his lips together. Released. I needed to say that. Outside my head. The bay was very quiet. Noel was looking at him with an expression that held something enormous in it. Something that had been building for 18 months, that knew its own name but had been waiting for the right moment to say it. Alan, he said softly. You don't have to. I love you. Simple, complete, with the particular quality of something that has been true for a long time and has just now found its exit. I've been in love with you for, I don't know exactly, a long time. I kept waiting for the right moment, but I think this might be it, weirdly enough. Because you just looked at me the way I've always hoped you would, and I'm in a hospital gown with a cracked wrist and your hand on my face and I'm not scared anymore. He paused. Well, the wrist still hurts. Alan laughed. It surprised him, not the content of the laugh, which was warm and real, but the fact that it arrived so naturally in the middle of all this feeling. He brought Noel's good hand up and held it between both of his. I love you, he said. I have been trying to find the right construction for that sentence for several months. Apparently, a scaffolding emergency is what was required. Noel's smile, the real one, the one with the full wattage, appeared, even here, even now. For the record, Noel said, I didn't fall on purpose. I should hope not, although it did produce results. Alan looked at him steadily. When you are discharged from this hospital, I am going to spend the rest of the day and then the rest of the week, and honestly the foreseeable future making sure you understand that you could have just told me. You're very intimidating. You have never been intimidated by me for a single moment in your life. That's true, Noel admitted. I think I just liked watching you work up to things. Alan kept his hand against Noel's face. Felt the warmth of it, the reality of it. Noel here, breathing, slightly broken in a couple of specific places, but fundamentally, entirely, fully himself. I need to speak to the attending physician, he said. I need to understand the full picture. Of course you do. I'm not managing you. I'm Alan. Noel's eyes were warm. I know. Go ask your very precise and thorough questions. I'll be here. The attending physician was Dr. Reyes, efficient, clear, evidently untroubled by thorough questions, for which Alan was grateful. He had approximately 12 specific questions organized in his mind, and he worked through them with the focused calmness that had returned to him now that he was in the same room as Noel and knew that the room contained Noel intact. The verdict, a hairline fracture of the left distal radius, the wrist, confirmed by imaging. One bruised rib, not fractured but requiring care and rest. Soft tissue bruising on the left side, the jaw, and the hip. No head injury, no internal involvement. The fall had been, as these things sometimes horrifically aren't, survivable without permanent consequence. They were looking at 6 weeks of wrist immobilization. A proper cast would go on once the swelling settled, in the next day or two, which meant a night of observation was recommended, not strictly necessary, medically, but sensible. He stays, Alan said, before Dr. Tucker. Reyes finished the sentence about whether Noel wanted to remain overnight. Dr. Reyes looked at him with the measured regard of someone accustomed to people making decisions about people they loved. That's Mr. Harris's decision. Alan turned to Noel. Noel, from the bed with the cracked glasses and the bruised jaw and the splinted wrist, said, I want to go home, with you. A beat. If that's… Yes, Alan said without any additional processing time. Obviously yes. Dr. Reyes provided a sheet of discharge instructions with the air of someone who had seen this exact dynamic approximately 400 times. He also provided, Alan was grateful to note, a very clear set of pain management guidelines and a schedule for follow-up imaging. Take it seriously, Dr. 2. Reyes added, directing this specifically at Noel in the particular tone of a doctor who has identified which party in a room is most likely to return to work too quickly. The rib especially. No heavy lifting, no sudden movements, rest when it hurts. He will, Alan said. Noel gave him a sideways look. I can speak for myself. You were about to say, I'll be fine, and try to negotiate the recovery timeline. A pause. I was not. Noel, I was going to say I'll be careful. Which is not the same as what the doctor said. Dr. Reyes made a small sound that may have contained amusement. I'll send the nurse in with the discharge paperwork. She left with the practiced efficiency of someone exiting a scene that had clearly resolved. Noel looked at Alan. Alan looked at Noel. The bay was quiet except for the soft background noise of a hospital doing its work, monitoring, sustaining, the particular hum of a place built to hold difficult moments until they became manageable ones. You're going to be insufferably attentive for the next 6 weeks, Noel said, but his voice was soft. His voice was something that could only accurately be described as happy, under the circumstances. The kind of happy that comes from being seen precisely and choosing to stay in the light. I prefer the word thorough, Alan said. I know you do. A beat of something quiet and real between them. Stay with me, Alan said. Not just tonight, stay. Bring your things properly. He said it the way he said important things, without decoration. Just the words. And behind them, everything else. I've been wanting to ask you for months, and I kept finding reasons to wait, and I am done waiting. You can have whatever space you need, whatever pace you need. I'm not asking you to change anything except the address you come home to. Noel was very still. Alan, I know it's a lot. It's not too much, Noel said. Careful, precise, honest. It's exactly the right amount. He looked down at his splinted wrist, then back up. I was going to suggest something similar about 2 weeks ago and then talked myself out of it. Why? Because I was afraid of wanting too much. Alan moved closer to him on the bed, not touching. Noel's side, the rib, awareness of every injury catalogued and accounted for, but close. Close enough that Noel could lean if he needed to. You're allowed to want things, Alan said. From me, specifically, you're allowed to want everything. Noel closed his eyes, opened them. That's going to take some getting used to. I have time. 6 weeks of recovery time, apparently. And after that, Noel smiled slowly. The real smile. And after that, the discharge process took an hour and 20 minutes, which Alan spent partly in the bay with Noel, partly in a quiet corner of the corridor making phone calls he had postponed. Chen, who was entirely gracious about the postponed dinner, Priya, who received his update with a brisk efficiency that did not quite hide the relief in her voice, and the Marchetti project site manager, with whom Alan had a conversation that was controlled and professional and made very clear that the state of that scaffolding platform was going to be reviewed immediately and thoroughly and with consequences. Between calls, he kept returning to Bay 7. He brought Noel water. He located, through the particular determined resourcefulness of someone who considers logistics a form of care, a phone charger from the nurse's station when Noel's battery dropped to 12%. He sat beside him and let Noel talk through the details of the site visit because Noel processed anxiety by narrating it, and Alan had learned, months ago, that the correct response to this was simply to listen. He was very good at listening to Noel. It was one of the things he had discovered about himself over the past 18 months, that the quality of attention he brought to everything else in his life could be redirected when it came to Noel, in a direction that felt like relief rather than effort. Like he had been using the same instrument for 100 different tasks, and had finally found the task it was actually made for. Noel talked about the site visit. He talked about what the revised pedestrian corridors were going to look like from the upper level. All that connected space, the way the sight lines worked, the small satisfaction of watching a good idea become a real thing. He talked about a conversation he'd had with one of the community liaisons last week, a woman named Mrs. There Zero, Farida, who had been attending every single public consultation meeting and who had cried quietly when she saw that her feedback about the communal garden placement had been incorporated into the final design. She said it was the first time she felt like she'd actually been heard, Noel said. By a development project, I mean. She said usually they consult you and then build what they were going to build anyway. He paused. Your company isn't like that. I want you to know that I know that. Alan was quiet for a moment. That matters to me, he said. That it's actually not just the right answer on paper. I know it does. Noel looked at him steadily. It's one of the first things I noticed about you. In the meeting, you could have thanked me for the feedback and nodded and done nothing. You didn't. It was the right call. A lot of people make wrong calls that are easier. Noel tilted his head slightly, studying him. You don't take the easy call when it's the wrong one. Not for the project, not for the people it affects, not for. He stopped. Not for me. Alan absorbed this. He thought about the 6 months of careful, patient, unhurried waiting. He thought about the conversations they'd had about pace, about trust, about the specific architecture of what Noel needed to feel safe, and the particular way Alan had listened to those conversations, not as constraints, but as information, as the most valuable kind of input, as the blueprint. You told me what you needed, Alan said. I just paid attention. Most people don't. I'm not most people. No, Noel agreed, with a softness that carried a whole history in it. You really aren't. Marcus brought the car around to the hospital entrance. He was as always composed and professional and managed the transition from hospital to vehicle with a quiet competence that Alan appreciated. Holding the door without hovering, acknowledging Noel's injury with a brief, careful courtesy, and then driving with the kind of smooth attentiveness that made the motion as painless as possible. Noel sat in the back seat, head tipped against Alan's shoulder. Alan had put his arm around him very carefully, left side clear, accommodating the rib, and Noel had settled into it with the naturalness of something that had been inevitable for a long time and had finally arrived. You'll need things from your apartment, Alan said. Tomorrow. I can have someone. Tomorrow, Alan. A pause. Tonight, I just want to be still. He said it without embarrassment, just the truth of it. The particular exhaustion of a body and a nervous system that had been through something and needed to be horizontal and quiet and in a place that felt safe. Alan understood this with precision because he was the same. He would not have used those words for himself probably, but he understood it. Okay, he said, tonight we're still. The city moved past the windows. The light was changing. Later afternoon now, tipping toward evening, the particular quality of light that arrives when a difficult day has found its way through to the other side. Warm, lower, full of the strange relief that follows the thing you were afraid of and found survivable. Noel made a small sound against his shoulder. Not quite a sigh, not quite a word, just presence. The physical fact of being close to someone and choosing to stay close. Alan pressed his lips briefly, carefully, to the top of Noel's head. Thank you, he said, quiet enough that it was only for Noel. Noel stirred slightly. For what? For calling me. A pause. I almost didn't. I know. He did know. He had heard it in the first seconds of that phone call, the careful quality of Noel's voice, the I don't want you to panic. The impulse to manage the impact. To take up as little space as possible with the difficult thing that had happened. He knew exactly where that impulse came from, and he loved Noel too entirely to let it go unaddressed forever. We're gonna work on that. The calling you part. The part where you think your needs are an inconvenience. A long pause. The city moved past. Noel's breathing was steady and slower now, the edge of exhaustion. Okay, he said softly, Yeah. Okay. Alan's apartment was the 41st floor of a building he partly owned, which was something Noel had initially found mildly absurd and had since simply incorporated into his understanding of the world. The way you incorporate any fact that is genuinely surprising until it becomes simply true. The apartment was large and full of natural light and organized with a precision that had struck Noel the first time he'd been inside it as the most honest thing he'd ever seen about Alan, not cold, as he'd half expected, but deliberately and lovingly considered. Every object in a place it had been chosen for, every surface clear of clutter, not from austerity, but from an almost architectural sense of how space should work. Books organized not alphabetically, but by reading sequence, in the order Alan had read them and wanted to read them again, which Noel had found out when he'd asked about the system, and Alan had explained it with the brief, private vulnerability of someone sharing something they don't usually talk about. There were things of Noel's already in the apartment, a jacket draped over the reading chair where he'd left it last week, and Alan had left it there, untouched, because Noel's jacket on Alan's reading chair was apparently the kind of thing Alan had decided was correct. A second set of keys on the kitchen counter. Alan had cut them 3 months ago and said, very simply, that it was practical. Noel had understood it was not just practical and had kept the keys in his pocket since that day like a small, warm thing. Alan helped him inside with a careful efficiency that was nothing like the distant competence he brought to managing everything else. This was close attention, personal, oriented entirely toward Noel's comfort. He got him settled on the sofa, propped with the exact correct arrangement of cushions on the left side for the rib, and went to get the medication the hospital had prescribed. He returned with water and the medication and a blanket, and then demonstrating a knowledge of Noel's habits that Noel himself might not have consciously articulated, a cup of tea, not coffee, because Noel drank tea in the evenings and Alan had at some point quietly learned this and acted on it. "You don't have to wait on me," Noel said. "I'm making tea. I would do that anyway." "Would you?" Alan looked at him. "Yes." Noel took the tea, held the warm mug in his good hand, and looked around the apartment in the evening light. Warm, directed, the city laid out behind the floor-to-ceiling windows like an offering. He looked at Alan, who had sat down beside him in the way he sat in Noel's general vicinity when not required to be at a specific distance. Close. Not touching, not quite, because of the rib and the wrist and the awareness, always the awareness, of what Noel's body needed. But close. "Tell me something," Noel said. Alan raised an eyebrow. "Anything. Something you're thinking." A pause. Alan Tanner, who was not in the habit of narrating his interior, looked at the windows for a moment. "Then, I was thinking about what you said. In the hospital. That you'd been in love with me for a long time." He turned back to Noel. "I was thinking about when it started for me, trying to identify the exact moment." "When was it?" "I'm not sure it was a moment." He considered this with the same careful precision he brought to everything. "It was more like a series of realizations, each one a step further in the same direction, until I turned around and couldn't see the beginning anymore." A pause. "The meeting, obviously. The first one. You challenged me in front of 12 people and you were right, and you knew you were right, and you looked at me the whole time like you were entirely prepared for whatever happened next." He paused. "I don't encounter that often. People who aren't performing or managing me or protecting themselves from me. You weren't any of those things. You were just there, present, saying what was true." Noel was quiet, listening. And then every subsequent thing just confirmed it. Alan's voice was level and warm and completely without the detachment that people sometimes mistook for his natural register. This was the other register, the one underneath, the room he'd kept locked. The way you talk about work, the way you laugh, the way you push back on me when I'm wrong and agree with me when I'm right without being sycophantic about either. The way you remember things, the drawing in the margins. He paused. "I fell in love with someone who was already fully themselves and didn't need me to complete anything, and that?" Another pause. "That is the only version of this I would have trusted." Noel's eyes were doing the complicated thing again, holding something enormous. "You could have said any of that," Noel said softly. Earlier. Any of it. I know. I was afraid. Of what? Of changing something I wasn't sure I could change back to. A beat. Of being someone who needed something this much. Noel looked at him for a long time. Then he shifted, very carefully, managing the rib, and put his head on Alan's shoulder. Being needed, Noel said, is one of the things I'm good at. Alan put his arm around him. The same careful arrangement, left side, awareness, every angle considered. I know, he said. I noticed. The city outside went on with its evening, lights coming up, the long blue descent of the sky toward night. Inside the apartment, nothing moved except Noel's breathing and the soft presence of Alan beside him, steady as a structure, warm as something that had finally stopped pretending to be architecture. Noel moved his things over the following week. It happened in the organic, slightly chaotic way that real things happen. Not all at once, not with a plan, but in rounds of practical necessity that accumulated into something permanent. His books came first, because he needed them, and Alan had a bookshelf with space that Noel's organizational system could coexist with Alan's reading sequence system without either being compromised. Then, his work materials. The rolling drafting case he'd had since graduate school. The specific brand of fine liner pens he ordered in bulk every few months. The project files for the 4 active consultancies he was managing. Then clothes. Then the small objects that constitute the texture of a life. The ceramic mug with the chip in the handle that he inexplicably loved. The framed photograph from a trip he'd taken in his mid-20s to a coastal town where the light had been extraordinary. The small cactus on his windowsill that had somehow survived 3 years of inconsistent care. Alan received all of this with quiet equanimity. He had cleared a section of the closet, reorganized the second bedroom as a proper study with a desk and the good light, and installed a larger monitor for Noel's work setup without being asked. Because he had noticed what Noel's work required and acted on the information. He did not make a thing of it. He didn't frame it, or mark it, or treat it as a milestone to be acknowledged. He just made the space and let Noel fill it, which was, as Noel was increasingly understanding, simply how Alan loved, practically, thoroughly, in the spaces between words. The wrist ached in a specific low-grade way that the medication managed. The rib made certain movements, reaching, twisting, deep breaths, into quiet exercises in patience. Noel was not, by nature, a patient person with his own recovery, but Alan made it bearable in a way that surprised him. Not by hovering. Alan was not a hoverer, he was precise. He showed up in the morning with breakfast configured correctly for someone whose left hand was out of commission. He brought documents to sign to Noel rather than expecting Noel to come to the desk. When Noel needed to work. And he did because projects don't pause for broken wrists. And working was one of the things that made Noel feel like himself. Alan sat in the same room and worked in companionable parallel, glancing over, periodically, with the focused attentiveness of someone who was monitoring without surveilling. On the 4th evening, Noel looked up from his laptop and found Alan watching him with an expression that he'd learned to read over 18 months of paying attention. The open one. The one without the professional composure. What? Noel said. Nothing, Alan. I was just... A brief pause, a rare small thing that might have been called bashfulness on a face less accustomed to steadiness. Thinking that this looks correct. You, here, this. Noel held his gaze. It does, he agreed. I want to tell you something. Alan set down his tablet. About what I said in the hospital. About being afraid of needing things. He paused. I have been a certain kind of alone for a long time. Not unhappily. I don't want you to think I was unhappy, but I had made an arrangement with myself, an understanding that certain things were not. He was choosing words carefully, with the precision he brought to everything important. Not available to me. Not compatible with what I was doing, with what I was building. I had put it away. The version of me that wanted the things you've given me. Noel was very still, listening. You didn't fix that, Alan said. I don't want to say that. You didn't fix anything because there was nothing broken, but you made it available again. You made it seem possible that I could have both. The work and this. He gestured slightly at the room. At Noel in it. I wanted you to know that, what you've given me, beyond the obvious things. The evening light was doing something beautiful to the room. Noel was aware of it, the way he was aware of the light at the site visits, as information, as the quality that made everything visible. I've been given things too, Noel said, significant things. He glanced at his splinted wrist, then back up. I had a story I was telling myself, about what alphas are like, what bonding means, what it costs to trust that kind of closeness. I had evidence for that story, and I was very careful with it. He paused. You kept being evidence for a different story, every time, over and over, patiently, just by being exactly who you are. A pause. That's not a small thing. That's actually everything. Alan absorbed this. The city outside had gone properly dark, full night now, the windows full of light refracted upward, the particular beauty of a city at night when you're inside somewhere warm. The bond, Alan said, not a question. Not a question and not a pressure. Noel could feel the difference. This was an opening, not a door being pushed. I've been thinking about it, Noel said. So have I. What have you been thinking? Alan looked at him steadily. That I want it when you want it, not sooner. That the timing is yours to name and mine to honor. A pause. And that I am prepared to wait exactly as long as necessary, without using the waiting as leverage, or making it heavy, or I know, Noel said. I know you won't. Is that new? Yes. Honest. Direct. That's new. They sat with that for a moment, the weight of it, not oppressive, but significant. The specific weight of trust that has been earned rather than assumed. Not tonight, Noel said. I don't mean tonight, but soon. I think. He found the words. I think I'm ready. Or I'm becoming ready, which is close enough that I can see it from here. He looked at Alan. I wanted you to know that. Alan's expression was the open one again. Steady and warm and full of the thing he had named in this room 4 days ago. The love that had been building since a meeting 18 months ago, organized and filed and patient, and was now simply allowed to exist in the light. I'll be here, Alan said. I know. It happened on a Sunday, 3 weeks later. Not planned, exactly. Or planned in the way that things are planned when two people have been circling a destination for a long time and then one morning wake up and both know, without discussion, that today is the day the circling ends. Noel's wrist was in its proper cast by then, dark blue, at his request, which had made Alan look at him briefly in the way that meant he found Noel quietly delightful. The rib was 80% improved, the bruising entirely faded. He was himself again, in all the ways that mattered. Back at work, back to the drawing in Margin's habit, back to calling Alan from across the apartment to tell him something interesting he'd just read. The particular domestic music of two people living together in a way that had already begun to feel less like an arrangement and more like a fact. That Sunday morning, the light came in at the angle that hit the floor of the bedroom first, then the bed, then found them both in the specific way that light finds things it has decided to illuminate. Noel woke up and lay still for a moment, aware of Alan sleeping beside him, the quiet steadiness of it, that same quality of composure present even in sleep, the dark hair and the particular way he breathed when completely at rest. Noel had memorized this, had memorized it with the same careful attention he'd brought to the revised pedestrian corridors, to Mrs. the Sis, Farida's garden, to every space he'd been asked to understand completely. He put his hand, the right one, the good one, against Alan's chest, felt the steady beat beneath his palm. Alan's eyes opened. Not abruptly, gradually, the way he woke up, as if consciousness were a room he entered with intention. Morning, Noel said. Alan covered Noel's hand with his own. Morning. They looked at each other. Today, Noel said, simply. Alan was still for exactly 1 breath. Then, are you sure? I've been sure for about 10 days. He paused. I've been letting myself be sure, which is different and took slightly longer. He met Alan's eyes steadily. I'm sure. Alan's thumb moved across the back of Noel's hand. The gesture was small and precise and said several things at once. I hear you, I believe you, I'm with you. All of it without any of the weight that certain kinds of attention can carry. No ownership in it, no claim. Just the presence of someone who has chosen you specifically and is very clear about that choice. Okay, Alan said. Then, yes, whenever you're… Now, Noel said. Now is good. What followed was quiet. Not absent of feeling. It was the opposite of absent. It was dense, with feeling full of 18 months of careful arriving of trust built in increments, of every conversation, and every shared silence, and every morning of coffee, and every evening of parallel work. All of it present, all of it gathered into this. The bond formed in the specific private way that bonds form. Not dramatic, not external, but deeply internal. A warmth that moved through Noel from the place of contact outward. Like light through a room that has been opened for the first time. He had been afraid of this, once. The closeness of it. The way it changed the landscape permanently. What he felt, with Alan, was nothing like what he had feared. What he felt was like a key in a lock that had been built for it. He felt Alan, the full interior reality of him. The composure and the feeling underneath it. The love that had been organized and patient for all these months. The particular steadiness of a person who had decided and then acted and did not flinch from either. The room he'd kept locked, with all its warmth. The version of Alan who had driven to the coast on a whim and stayed out past 2 in the morning. All of it there, inside the composed exterior, alive and intact, and now given freely. To the bond between them. Noel thought, oh, he is full of this. He has been full of it all along. Alan, through the new and extraordinary channel of what they had just made, felt Noel feel this. And what moved through him in response was not something he had words for. Not in any of the registers he used for anything else. It was simpler than words. It was simply, yes, exactly, finally. They lay still for a long time after. The city was Sunday quiet outside. The light moved across the floor with the patience of something that has nowhere to be. Noel's hand was still on Alan's chest. Alan's hand was still on Noel's. How do you feel? Alan said eventually. His voice was different, not unrecognizable, still him, but lower, the composure worn to something more essential, something closer to the marrow. Complete, Noel said, and then, because he was Noel, also hungry. Can we have breakfast? Alan laughed. The real one, the one that arrived without announcement, that surprised even him when it came. He pressed his mouth to Noel's forehead and stayed there for a moment. Yes, he said, we can have breakfast. 6 weeks after the scaffolding fall, Noel went back to the Marchetti site. Alan drove him, which Noel had agreed to on the condition that Alan stayed in the car rather than treating a site visit like a security briefing. Alan had agreed to this visibly and had then spent the previous evening reviewing the revised scaffolding safety certification that the site manager had sent, which Noel had technically not noticed, but which had been on the kitchen counter in an open folder that Noel could very easily have read, so it was a matter of interpretation. The site was in its mid-stages now, the bones of the building visible, the shape of what it was going to be legible if you knew how to look. Noel knew how to look. He stood at the edge of the revised pedestrian access zone and looked across the space where the corridors would connect the eastern and western sections and felt the particular satisfaction of a good idea made real. The site manager found him there, a different site manager now, which was a consequence of the scaffolding incident that had been handled through channels Alan had engaged with a thoroughness that Noel had not asked him to deploy and had decided not to argue with. Mr. Harris. A pause, looking at the cast. How's the wrist? 4 more weeks, Noel said. Then we'll see what the imaging says. They walked the revised access plan together. The corridors were coming in exactly right. The sight lines, the spatial relationships, the intuitive navigation that made a development feel welcoming rather than disorienting. Noel took notes in his right-handed way, the pen behind his ear, the tablet in his right hand, the the small drawings in the margins materializing without him quite deciding to make them. When he came back to the car, Alan was where he'd left him, sitting in the back seat, reading something on his tablet, composed and focused and exactly as described. He looked up when Noel got in. "How is it?" Alan said. "Coming in exactly right." Noel settled into the seat, maneuvering around the cast with the practiced ease of 6 weeks of adaptation, the eastern corridors especially. "The spatial flow is going to be very good." He paused. "Mrs. Farida is going to love it." "Good. A beat. Are you tired?" "A little." "Mostly the good kind." He looked over at Alan. Through the bond, that warm and permanent new channel, he could feel the quality of Alan's attention, focused, fond, the subtle satisfaction of a person whose person has returned from somewhere. "Thank you for staying in the car." Alan's expression did not quite conceal the fact that staying in the car had cost him something. "Thank you for coming back from the site without additional injuries. That was the goal, yes. The primary goal. One of several goals." Noel tilted his head. The corridor assessment was also a goal. "I understand." A moment of quiet. The sight outside the window, the bones of the building, the shape of what it would become. "I want to tell you something," Noel said. "About the job. My practice, specifically." Alan waited. "I'd been offered a partnership at the firm, full partner, not just consulting." He paused. "It's a good offer. It's the right next step, professionally." Another pause. "I wanted to tell you before I decided, because it affects things, hours sometimes, the way projects work. I wanted to make sure we'd talked about it." Alan looked at him steadily. "What does accepting feel like?" "Exciting. A little terrifying." He paused. "The same way most right things feel." "Then accept it." "It's not that simple. The practical things are resolvable. They always are. The question is whether it's the right choice for you." A pause. "Is it?" Noel thought about Mrs. Farida crying about the garden, about the corridor coming in right, about the version of his work that was possible when he had the standing and the resources and the authority to push back on the wrong calls. "Yes," he said. "Then accept it." Alan reached over, carefully, always with the awareness of the cast, and covered Noel's hand briefly. "Everything else we'll figure out." Through the bond, Noel felt what accompanied that certainty. Not performance. Not the professional composure. The real thing. The steadiness that had been there all along, offered freely, without condition. He turned his hand over and held Alan's. "Okay," he said. "Yeah, okay." The Marchetti development opened on a clear morning in late autumn, with a ceremony that involved community members, city officials, the development team, the planning consultants, and a woman named Mrs. They. Farida, who had been at every public consultation meeting and who stood at the edge of the communal garden, placed exactly where she had requested it, with her hands folded and an expression on her face that said everything worth saying about what good work can mean. Noel was there as a partner of the consulting firm, which was exactly what it had felt like, the right next step. Expensive in hours and energy, profoundly worth it. He was taking photographs with his phone. The corridors, the garden, the sightlines from the upper level that he had originally climbed scaffolding to verify and which were, as he had predicted, exactly right. The cast had come off 8 months ago. The wrist gave him occasional reminders in cold weather, which he had mentioned to Alan exactly once, and which Alan had used as justification for researching heating options for the home office, which Noel had let him do because some battles were not worth having and also because the heated floor was very nice. Alan arrived late, pulled from a meeting that had run long, which Noel had learned to anticipate and had stopped minding, in the way that you stop minding things that are simply part of who someone is. He arrived in the charcoal suit, and the silver cufflinks made his way through the small crowd with the particular quality of movement that still after 2 years made Priya's description accurate. The air changed around him, not with aggression, but with certainty. He found Noel at the edge of the garden. "The eastern corridor," Noel said, without turning around. He had felt him arrive, The bond, warm and particular, like a room recognizing someone who lives in it. Stand here and look left. Alan stood beside him and looked left. The corridor opened exactly as the design intended, a clear, welcoming line of sight from the affordable housing section through to the commercial amenity space, the kind of connection that said, "You belong here, this is yours." The door is open. The morning light came through it at the angle they'd planned for. "Yes," Alan said. "Told you, you did." A pause. "You were right from the beginning." "I usually am." That's an overstatement. It's a modest understatement, actually. Noel glanced sideways, and Alan was looking at him with the expression that Noel had over time, come to understand as the unguarded one. The one Priya had seen in the corridor outside the elevator on the day of the hospital call. The one that had been the first real sight of the room underneath. Love in its least managed form, specific and clear and entirely without apology. "Come and meet Mrs. Farida," Noel said. "Is she the one who—" "Yes, come on." He took Alan's hand, the natural, thoughtless ease of it, the thing that had required so much courage to approach, and was now simply ordinary in the best possible sense of the word, and pulled him toward the garden. Alan let himself be pulled. Which was, for anyone paying attention, the most extraordinary thing he had ever done. He had spent years building things that would stand. Companies, structures, reputations, the architecture of a life that could withstand anything. He was good at it. He was probably among the best. But the best thing he had ever built was this. A morning in late autumn, his hand in Noel's hand, walking toward a woman crying happy tears over a garden in a development that was designed with care. In a city that held them both. His employees had never seen him panic, until his Omega called from the hospital. After that, they saw something rarer. They saw him run, not away from anything, toward everything. If you made it to the end, you're my kind of person. Leave a subscribe, comment down your favorite part of the story, and if you want early access to videos, exclusive content, or just want to support the channel, hit that join button right below the video. Even one member genuinely means the world to me. See you in the next one.